Hello, Jonathan and Jillian. So this is Lecture 3 for American History 2. Today we're going to talk about the coming to power of Ronald Reagan. Now, you'll remember when we talked about the New Deal in class before, I stressed over and over again that the modern Democratic Party was fundamentally reshaped by Franklin Roosevelt. Every modern Democrat is an heir to the New Deal. Senator Sanders, running for president this year, has expressly said the socialism that he's talking about is the promise of the New Deal taken further and fulfilled. But every Democrat is an admirer of Franklin Roosevelt, and every modern Democrat stands in his footsteps. You could say the same thing about the Republican Party, at least until 2016. Donald Trump has some different ideas than Reagan on some important issues. Could be the party has been reshaped by Donald Trump. We'll have to see what happens. 4 years is too short a time frame to get real historical depth on something. But certainly the Republican Party from 1980 till 2016 was Ronald Reagan's party. Every Republican of my generation that I know admired Ronald Reagan greatly, and their policies have been reflective of his ideals. So let's talk about the man, Ronald Reagan, and we'll review a little bit the election of 1980 that he beat Jimmy Carter and what he did when he became president, because all those things are really important for understanding a modern American political history. So many of our presidents have come from privilege, millionaires' sons in the case of Franklin Roosevelt and Donald Trump and George W. Bush and George H.W. Bush and John Kennedy. They were all the sons of millionaires. Not so with Ronald Reagan. He was from very humble background. He was born in 1912, so he would have been a boy in the roaring 20s and come to manhood in the Great Depression. But his father was a traveling shoe salesman. But his father never even got ahead in that humble line of work because his father was a serious alcoholic. And Reagan had to grow up dealing with the problems that a child of an alcoholic can have. So Reagan had a very disadvantaged background of relative poverty and challenge, moving from town to town and the like. Finally, they kind of stuck in a place called Dixon, Illinois when he was in high school. And then he went on. He was bright enough to get a good scholarship to college, and he went to Eureka College, a small Disciples of Christ college in Illinois. But Reagan would never have claimed to be a great intellectual. He knew where his talents lie, and he was not a man of deep thought, bright enough, capable in class. But his real passion he discovered in high school was acting, drama. And he was an economics major in college, but his heart was in theater in college. I don't even know if they had a theater major at Eureka College at the time, but he loved acting. And so he chose to try to make a career out of that. So he graduated from college, I guess that would have been around 1936, during the Great Depression. Well, not a lot of good-paying jobs as an actor, but he managed to fall into a very strange type of acting on the Great Plains. The minor league baseball teams of the area wanted to broadcast their games on the radio, but they had access only to this one radio station, and then they could apparently do a sort of repeater thing on other stations in the area. So they couldn't very well send out reporters into the field with radio trucks or something to cover these minor league games. Instead, what they did is they had people who were attending the games phone into the radio station at the end of each inning telling what had happened, and then they'd give those written notes to Ronald Reagan, who would get on the radio and act like he was at the game. They even had some simple sound effects like cracking bats when somebody got a hit and things that he would use. And so his first acting job was as a voice actor on radio, acting out minor league baseball games that were actually miles away from where he was, which is just fun. But anyway, he's a handsome man and a capable actor, and he went to Hollywood to see if he can make it on the silver screen. And he did. He made a career in Hollywood for about 20 years. He was what's known as a B actor. meaning that he was never the top bill, or well, almost never. There were a couple of movies where he was the top billed actor, but these were minor motion pictures. And in the better pictures, he was the second actor, the best friend to the star, the supportive buddy kind of thing in most of his pictures. I remember reading that when Samuel Goldwyn Mayer, the MGM guy, was told that Ronald Reagan was running for president in his old age. He'd gone a little senile. And somebody said that Ronald Reagan was running for president, and Mayer said, no. Jimmy Stewart for president, Ronald Reagan is his best friend. That's pretty much the way they thought of Reagan as an actor. He was a good buddy to the best friend. You know the kind of people in movies today who do those sort of roles. So he was an accomplished actor. He got a steady work. He was nominated for an Oscar in one picture called King's Row. I think it was 1944, but it might have been just after the war. He didn't win, but he did that. Of the quality movies that he was in, probably the one that has the longest credit to its name is Knute Rockne, All-American, which was about the football coach at Notre Dame. But Ronald Reagan played George Gipp, or the Gipper, one of Rockne's players on the Notre Dame squads. And George Gipp contracted a serious illness and died while he was still a college student. But he was a football hero, and he had this lingering illness, and Reagan played him very well. A tagline from that movie, one of these days, Coach, when the chips are down and the brakes are beating the boys, you get out there and you tell them to win just one for the Gipper. And so Win One for the Gipper kind of stuck with Ronald Reagan for the rest of his life. So if you ever hear that reference, it's referring to Ronald Reagan's acting career long before he went into politics. His first introduction to politics, though, was actually as a New Deal Democrat. Ronald Reagan became the president of the Screen Actors Guild, the actors' labor union in Hollywood. And as you know, the Roosevelt administration was pro-union. Unlike most presidential administrations before it, they were pro-union. And as a union president, Reagan was very much pro-Roosevelt. He was very much a New Deal Democrat in his young adulthood. He was a very effective president of the Screen Actors Guild. But things began to change for him in part because of the Red Scare. You remember that. Joseph McCarthy and HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee. Remember that HUAC called in those screenwriters, thinking that screenwriters in Hollywood might be subverting American values and turning people communist subtly where they don't even know it. Well, as part of the HUAC investigation of Hollywood, Ronald Reagan was called in to testify. And he apparently did believe that communists might have been trying to get into his labor union, and they might very well be trying to subvert America. And so his New Deal Democrat ideas began to pivot towards the Republican Party, in part because of his dislike, very visceral dislike of communism. But his acting career on the silver screen, oh, by the way, he married Nancy Davis, a starlet, I guess we'd say. She had minor roles. They starred together in a movie called Hellcats of the Navy, and about Navy pilots and Navy nurses. And that's where they met, and that's where they fell in love, and they got married. So he married an actress, Nancy Reagan, later. But anyway, by about 1954-55, Reagan's silver screen career was fading, but television was providing a lot of work for actors, and Ronald Reagan would become the voiceover intro announcer for a Western series on television, and that gave him another 12 years of acting work as a voice actor again. So he went back to his roots, I guess you could say. But that didn't pay enough for his growing family, so he took a job as a spokesperson for General Electric, GE, the electronics manufacturer, the manufacturer of household appliances, refrigerators and stoves and all that. He became a spokesperson for them, both on radio and TV commercials, and traveling around the country at trade shows, but he also spoke to workers in GE factories, as part of the company's, esprit de corps building exercise, you might say. And in that process, Reagan realized he had a real rapport with the common American, that he could talk to large crowds, move them deeply. And he also got to know businessmen, business executives, and begin more and more to appreciate the role of big business in American life and his commitment to fostering American commerce and to the little guy. You could attribute maybe to this period in the 50s and early 60s when he was traveling the country as a GE spokesperson, giving speeches and touching base with people and defending American capitalism against the communism he disliked so much. So that was a really formative moment for Ronald Reagan. But the real capstone to this period of his life came in 1964. Barry Goldwater was the Republican nominee. Now, Barry Goldwater was a very conservative figure. He proved to be far too conservative for the American electorate. He would lose in a landslide to Lyndon Johnson in 1964. But while the polls showed Goldwater was doing very poorly and the election was getting closer, the Goldwater campaign took out, I think it was 45 minutes of network TV time. But they didn't want to put Goldwater on the screen. They wanted a more friendly, affable, trustworthy spokesman. And they picked Ronald Reagan to be the spokesman for Barry Goldwater. And he gave a talk, it's known as the speech in Republican circles to this day, talking about America and a vision for the future, a conservative vision for the future, and the dangers of communism, but how we will win because of our commitment to freedom and democracy and God and all that we treasure as Americans. This speech was deeply moving, and people were extremely impressed. Goldwater lost the election terribly, but Reagan made a huge hit with Republican political figures. He would be run for governor of California in 1966, win handily. So the actor has turned politician, the governor of the biggest state population-wise in the country, overseeing, I think, the 10th largest economy on earth if California was an independent country. So his experience as governor, and he would serve 2 terms as governor, would be a very fine preparation for the White House. So although his political experience was limited strictly to being governor of California before he went to the White House, that's a big, big job, being governor of California. And so when he first ran for president in 1976 against Gerald Ford for the Republican nomination, Ford's a Republican, the president who succeeded Nixon, Reagan challenged him. And it was actually very close. It wasn't until the convention itself in 1976 that the delegates voted to go with Ford, but it was very close. And Reagan gave another stirring speech to the convention. He endorsed Ford and so on, but a lot of people left the hall saying, we nominated the wrong guy. Ronald Reagan would have been a better candidate. And who knows, maybe he would have been in 1976. But he would come back in 1980 and run against Jimmy Carter then and beat him handily. We'll talk about the election of 1980 and the beginning of Ronald Reagan's presidency in our next lecture. Thank you.